Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that one of America's most iconic restaurant chains, a $1 billion empire, was started as an April Fool's Day joke by six guys who just wanted a place where they couldn't get kicked out? And what if I told you that the very gimmick that made them world famous is the exact reason they are now filing for bankruptcy? The story of Hooters does not begin in a polished boardroom with venture capitalists and market analysis. It begins improbably as a joke. On April 1st, 1983, in the sun drenched, humid air of Clearwater, Florida, six friends embarked on a venture born of whimsy and a shared desire for a specific kind of sanctuary. These six men, who would become known as the Hooters Six, possessed absolutely zero restaurant experience. Their collective expertise in the hospitality industry was limited, by their own admission, to being patrons, specifically patrons who were tired of being ejected from other establishments. The concept was so audacious, so seemingly destined for failure, that they filed their incorporation papers on April Fool's Day. This date was a deliberate choice, a built in excuse. When the business inevitably collapsed, they could laugh it off as an elaborate prank. Their business plan, if one could call it that, was less a strategic document and more a wish list for their ultimate man cave. The core pillars were simple: cold beer, spicy chicken wings, and an environment where they and their friends wouldn't get kicked out. They secured a location that seemed to confirm their grim predictions: a rundown, cursed former nightclub on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. The building was notorious, a graveyard for businesses that had tried and failed within its walls. Instead of being deterred, the founders embraced the dark humor of it all, reportedly even building a small graveyard on the property with tombstones for the failed ventures that preceded them. But the Hooters Six had a gimmick, a central feature that would differentiate them from every other sports bar in America and invent an entire polarizing category of dining: the breastaurant. The concept was built on a foundation of deliberate, unapologetic sex appeal. This manifested in the uniform, an icon of Americana now as recognizable as any fast food mascot. Since the company's inception, over 300,000 women have worn the iconic orange shorts and tight white tank tops, becoming the central focus of the brand's identity. In the first few weeks after opening, the restaurant was as dead as the businesses in its metaphorical graveyard. Customers were non existent. But the founders combined their central gimmick with another nascent cultural trend: buffalo style chicken wings. While now ubiquitous, in the early 1980s, they were not yet a national staple. Hooters, by placing them front and center, accidentally caught two cultural waves at once: the rising popularity of spicy wings and the timeless philosophy that sex sells. The brand's identity was solidified through savvy, if unconventional, marketing. Co founder Ed Drost, while judging a local bikini contest, spotted Lynn Austin. He approached her and declared she would become world famous with Hooters. Austin became the face of the brand, the original Hooters girl, and her appearance as Playboy's Miss July in 1986 propelled the restaurant's image from a local curiosity into the national consciousness. This was coupled with guerrilla marketing stunts that embodied the brand's irreverent spirit. Droste famously donned a chicken suit and ran through traffic to attract attention. In an even more audacious move, when a boat sank nearby, he swam out to the wreck and spray painted the Hooters logo on its hull turning a maritime mishap into free advertising. The gamble paid off spectacularly. The joke had become a juggernaut. By 1993, just one decade after its April Fool's Day inception, the Hooters chain had exploded to 100 locations. It was no longer a joke. It was a corporation generating $200 million in annual revenue, all built on the simple and increasingly controversial foundation of wings and sex appeal. And that spectacular gamble, it led directly to the 1990s and early 2000s, which represented the absolute apex of Hooters' cultural and financial power. The brand transcended its restaurant roots to become a full fledged entertainment phenomenon, embarking on ventures that ranged from logical brand extensions to acts of spectacular, hubristic absurdity. The most famous of these was, without question, Hooters Air. Launched in 2003, Hooters Air was a fully functional airline. It was a flying billboard for the brand's ethos, promising to put the fun back in flying. The airline's fleet featured planes painted with the brand's logo, and the cabin experience was unique. In addition to standard certified flight attendants, two Hooters girls were on every flight to assist with hosting duties and entertain passengers. The routes were often to leisure destinations, connecting cities like Atlanta to vacation spots such as Myrtle Beach and Las Vegas. For a time, it was a massive publicity generator, the ultimate expression of the brand's why not attitude. However, the airline industry is notoriously difficult, and branding alone cannot defy economic gravity. The venture was a financial catastrophe. It launched just as the industry was grappling with the fallout from the September 11th attacks, and crucially, it faced the spike in fuel prices following Hurricane Katrina. Hooters Air burned through an estimated $40 million in just 3 years before it was permanently grounded in 2006. It was a spectacular failure, but one that cemented the brand's legendary status for sheer audacity. While Hooters Air was its most flamboyant venture, it was not the only one. The company expanded into Hooters branded casinos, magazines, and the perennially popular calendars, which became a staple in mechanic shops and college dorm rooms across the country. The brand was printing money. By its peak in 2008, just before the global financial crisis, Hooters was pulling in close to $1 billion in annual revenue. The restaurant model was perfected. A single busy location operating at full capacity could generate $3 million a year on its own. The company seemed unstoppable, a cultural fixture that had successfully weathered criticism and legal challenges to become a dominant force in casual dining. Now, you can't build a business like this without attracting some attention. From its inception, the Hooters business model was a magnet for legal and social conflict. The very premise that guaranteed its success also made it a prime target for litigation and protests. The brand's history is defined as much by its court battles as its chicken wings, and these controversies would, over time, begin to chip away at its public image. The most significant and defining legal challenge arrived between 1991 and 1995, culminating in a showdown with the United States government itself. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, launched a multi year investigation into Hooters, charging the company with systemic sex discrimination. The core of the complaint was the company's refusal to hire men for the Hooters girl server role. The government's position was simple and legally sound. Serving food and beverages is a job, and no physical trait unique to women is required to perform that job. The EEOC demanded that Hooters not only change its hiring practices, but also pay $22 million in damages to a class of male applicants who had been denied employment. For any other company, this would have been a death blow, likely resulting in a quiet, massive settlement and a complete rebranding. Hooters, however, treated the lawsuit as the ultimate marketing opportunity. Instead of capitulating, they went on the offensive with a brilliant populist campaign. They introduced the world to Vince, a burly, hairy man photographed in the full Hooters uniform, blonde wig, tank top, and orange shorts. The campaign was designed to show the public the absurdity of the government's demands. This was paired with a march on Washington featuring hundreds of Hooters girls and a call to arms for their customers who flooded Congress with angry postcards protesting the government's waste of taxpayer money. The strategy was a masterful stroke of public relations. Hooters successfully framed the debate not as one of civil rights and equal opportunity, but as one of government overreach and an attack on a beloved American institution. The EEOC, facing a public relations nightmare and intense political pressure, eventually dropped the investigation in exchange for a settlement. Hooters agreed to create more gender neutral support roles, bartenders, hosts, and cooks, but it won the war. It was allowed to keep the server role exclusively female, preserving the core of its business model. While the EEOC battle was its most famous, other lawsuits revealed a darker, more problematic side to the company's culture. In 2001, a manager in Florida decided to run a beer sales contest promising a new Toyota to the winner. The top waitress, Jody Berry, was blindfolded on the day of the prize ceremony and led to the parking lot. When the blindfold was removed, she was presented not with a car, but with a toy Yoda, a plastic action figure from Star Wars. The prank was not appreciated. Berry sued the company and settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, which was widely reported to be more than enough to purchase any Toyota she wanted. More serious allegations piled up, painting a picture of a company culture rife with harassment and exploitation. In 2004, a lawsuit was filed by 40 women after hidden cameras were discovered in the employee changing rooms at a California location. The manager had allegedly been filming women, including minors, as they changed into their uniforms during job interviews. Other lawsuits allege that managers would threaten to fire waitresses if they did not lose weight, sometimes offering them gym memberships with the implicit threat of termination. In 2015, a racial discrimination case gained national attention when Farron Johnson, a black employee, was told she could not have blonde highlights in her hair because it was not a natural look for her, even as her white colleagues were permitted to have similarly unnatural hair colors. In nearly all these cases, the corporate response pattern was consistent: deny, discredit, and fight. The company often branded claims as baseless, fought them aggressively in court, or minimized the incidents as the actions of a few rogue employees rather than symptoms of a systemic cultural problem. This aggressive defensive posture, while often legally successful in the short term, would contribute to a growing public perception of the brand as predatory and anachronistic. But that victory against the EEOC in the 1990s and even the financial peak of 2008 masked a deeper, slower moving threat. The world was changing and Hooters was not. The very demographic that had been its bread and butter was aging, and the new generation of consumers viewed the brand with a mixture of apathy and disdain. The core of the decline was this generational shift. Millennials and later Gen Z had fundamentally different values from the Gen X and Boomer patrons who had built the brand. Younger consumers, particularly those in the coveted 18 to 24 age bracket, showed significantly less interest in the boobs and beer concept. Data from adult websites, often a canary in the coal mine for cultural trends, indicated a decline in searches for the specific types of content that Hooters capitalized on, suggesting a broader cultural shift away from overt objectification and toward a desire for authentic connections. The brand's entire premise began to feel dated. It was no longer seen as playful and rebellious. It was increasingly viewed as a cultural relic, the kind of place your creepy uncle would frequent. This cultural vulnerability was exploited by a new wave of competitors that either refined the Hooters model or rendered it obsolete. The market Hooters had invented was now crowded. A new category of polished breastaurants emerged, led by chains like Twin Peaks. These competitors essentially stole the Hooters playbook, but updated it for a new era, offering a mountain lodge aesthetic, a wider selection of craft beers, and crucially, a greater emphasis on food quality. They kept their sex appeal, but packaged it in a slightly more upscale, less tacky environment. Simultaneously, a second front opened in the war for the American wing consumer. Chains like Buffalo Wild Wings, which had grown to over 1,000 locations, and Wingstop, with its explosive growth to over 2,000 locations, dominated the market. Their strategy was simple. They focused entirely on the sports and the food. By removing the sexualized stigma, they broadened their appeal exponentially. Families, groups of female friends, and office colleagues could all go to Buffalo Wild Wings without the social awkwardness or moral debate associated with a trip to Hooters. Hooters was now being squeezed from both sides by competitors who were better at being breastaurants and by competitors who were better at being wing focused sports bars. It's worth digging into why these competitors won so decisively. Buffalo Wild Wings didn't just win by not being Hooters, it won by being a better sports bar. Its locations were purpose built for group viewing, with dozens of high definition screens, stadium style layouts, and a truly massive selection of tap beers. It became the default destination for college game days and, critically, for the booming fantasy football market. It was family friendly by default, not by a desperate 11th hour marketing pivot. Hooters, by contrast, was stuck. It couldn't really market to families because, well, it was Hooters. And it couldn't market itself as the ultimate sports destination because its layout and atmosphere were secondary to its server focused gimmick. Then you have Twin Peaks, which was essentially Hooters 2.0. It learned from every one of Hooters' mistakes. The Mountain Lodge theme felt more premium and current than the tacky yet unrefined 1980s beach shack vibe of Hooters. The food menu was more ambitious, moving beyond just wings to include items like pot roast and venison chili. They even rethemed the gimmick, calling their servers lumberjills and trading the orange shorts for plaid tops. It was the same core concept, but wrapped in a 2010s flannel shirt instead of a 1980s tank top. Hooters was trapped in the middle. It was no longer new and polished like Twin Peaks, and it wasn't mainstream and universally acceptable like Buffalo Wild Wings. It was an icon of a past era, and it had no clear lane left to drive in. Faced with this existential crisis, Hooters began to suffer from a severe identity crisis. The company's leadership could not decide what the brand was supposed to be. In the early 2010s, they made a desperate pivot toward a family friendly image de emphasizing the Hooters girls and trying to market the restaurant as a mainstream sports viewing destination. This pivot included adding salads and other healthier options to the menu, a move that was seen as laughably off brand by both critics and core customers. This strategy was in direct conflict with the brand's DNA and was almost immediately contradicted by their own actions. In 2021, management introduced a new, even more revealing uniform short, which employees described as underwear. The move sparked a massive viral backlash from their own employees on TikTok, forcing the company to retract the mandate and make the new shorts optional. This oscillation between wanting to be a wholesome family restaurant and wanting to be an even more sexualized version of itself was a clear sign of a brand in chaos, a company that had lost its identity and was desperately and erratically trying to find a new one. But while all these cultural and competitive pressures were eroding Hooters from the outside, a different and equally lethal force was hollowing it out from within: financial engineering. The original founders, the Hooters Six, had cashed out in 2001, selling the trademark and licensing rights. This began a complex and unstable web of ownership changes that would ultimately seal the company's fate. The brand passed through several hands before being acquired by private equity firms, first Hig Capital, and then in 2019, a joint acquisition by Triartisan Capital and Nord Bay Capital. These firms operated on the standard private equity playbook: buy a company, often with its own money, load it with debt to pay for the acquisition and extract dividends, and then attempt to flip it for a profit a few years later. This strategy, known as a leveraged buyout, is incredibly risky for the company being acquired. So let's be clear about what this leveraged buyout actually meant for the people frying the wings and serving the beer. Imagine you want to buy a $400,000 house, but you don't have any money. So you go to the bank and you force the house to take out a $400,000 mortgage on itself. The bank gives the house the money, you take the money, and you hand it to the seller. You now have the keys to the house, and the house itself is left with the crushing debt. You owe nothing. This is, in simple terms, what private equity did to Hooters. The company was forced to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars against its own assets just so the new owners could buy it. This is a ticking time bomb. This strategy only works if the company you buy is growing at a fantastic rate so it can make enough new money to pay off that massive new parasitic debt and still have enough left over to innovate and grow. But as we just discussed, Hooters wasn't growing, it was shrinking. This was like forcing someone who just got a pay cut to take out a massive second mortgage. The result was inevitable. Hooters became a victim of this debt trap. The new owners saddled the company with a staggering $376 million in debt. This financial burden had immediate and devastating operational consequences. The company's cash flow, which should have been used to innovate and compete, was now almost entirely diverted to servicing this massive debt. By the early 2020s, Hooters owed $30 million annually in interest payments alone. This financial straitjacket crippled the company's ability to respond to the very threats identified in its decline. Deferred maintenance wasn't an accident, it was a non negotiable part of the new math. You can't fix a torn vinyl booth, repair a flickering neon sign, or update a 20-year-old kitchen when that money has already been earmarked for a Wall Street bank to pay the interest on a loan the restaurant never asked for. Training budgets for staff were slashed, leading to a decline in service quality. Then, after 2020, inflation hit and the cost of chicken wings, the company's core product, skyrocketed, as did labor costs. Hooters was trapped. It couldn't raise prices enough to cover costs without driving away its price sensitive base, and it couldn't invest in modernization because every spare dollar was going to its private equity owners and the banks that held their debt. The company was being bled dry, suffocating under a mountain of debt it had not created for itself. And as the financial situation grew dire, Hooters management grasped at straws, launching a series of desperate pivots to find a new revenue stream. The most significant attempt was the launch of Hoots Wings, a fast casual spin off concept. Hoots was, in essence, an admission that the core Hooters model was broken. It was designed to compete directly with Wingstop, featuring counter service, a smaller footprint, and, most tellingly, both male and female servers in modest uniforms of khaki shorts and t shirts. It was Hooters without the Hooters. The company announced ambitious expansion plans, but the concept failed to gain traction. Growth stalled immediately, and only a few locations remained operational, a failed experiment that proved the brand's name alone was not enough. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and the casual dining industry evaporated overnight. With its dining rooms shuttered, Hooters pivoted hard to delivery, launching a series of ghost kitchens or virtual brands. These were delivery only restaurants operated out of existing Hooters kitchens with names like Hootie's Burger Bar, Hootie's Bait and Tackle, and Hootie's Chicken Tenders. For a brief time during the lockdowns, this strategy was a lifeline, generating much needed cash flow. However, internal data soon revealed a fatal flaw in the plan. An analysis showed that a full 75% of the customers ordering from these virtual brands had never visited or ordered from a physical Hooters restaurant. This meant the ghost kitchens were not converting new customers to the core brand. They were simply a separate, low margin business. As soon as lockdown restrictions eased and consumers returned to experiential dining, the virtual brands faded, and Hooters was left in an even worse position. Its core business was still broken, and its temporary fix had proven to be just that, temporary. The end came swiftly. The combined pressures of massive debt, crippling inflation, shifting cultural tides, and failed pivots proved insurmountable. In 2024, the company abruptly announced the closure of approximately 40 underperforming locations, a clear sign of deep financial distress. The bleeding, however, was too severe to be stopped by selective closures. In March 2025, Hooters of America officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. This, however, was not a liquidation. It was not the end of the brand, but rather a prepackaged bankruptcy, a strategic reorganization designed to shed debt and transfer ownership. The plan revealed a final, ironic twist in the Hooters saga, a return of the founders. The remaining corporate owned locations were to be sold to a franchise group led by none other than original co founder Neil Kiefer. Kiefer, whose franchise group had continued to operate successfully in Florida and Chicago, had been a vocal critic of the private equity ownership. He publicly blamed them for driving the company into the ground, alleging they had no history with the brand and had alienated the customer base. He claimed his Florida strategy, which involved maintaining the original recipes, which he claims private equity changed, and fostering a social casual vibe, was the path to salvation. This new leadership has outlined a future for Hooters that is, once again, a pivot. The plan involves moving away from the brand's more explicit elements, such as bikini nights, and focusing more on community charity work to repair its battered reputation. The challenge, however, remains monumental. The new old leadership must find a way to modernize a brand that is synonymous with a bygone era, all while grappling with the remnants of a massive debt load. They must convince a new generation of consumers that Hooters is more than just a cultural relic, while simultaneously trying to shed a reputation for misogyny and exploitation that has been 40 years in the making. The Hooters story is a complex tapestry of marketing genius, cultural rebellion, legal controversy, and catastrophic financial mismanagement. Whether this final chapter is a rebirth or a hospice, only time will tell.